What happens when Hollywood's toughest guy meets late-night television's most condescending host? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on live television, where Dave Bautista's patience finally snapped against Jimmy Kimmel's relentless provocations. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how not to treat your guests, and the explosive moment when one of wrestling's most respected veterans decided he'd had enough. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because what you're about to see will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. The tension was palpable from the moment Dave Bautista walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live set. The former WWE champion turned Hollywood heavyweight had come to promote his latest action thriller. But it was clear from Jimmy's opening remarks that this wasn't going to be a typical promotional interview. As the cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats, Jimmy's first words set a tone that would spiral completely out of control. "Well, well, well, look who decided to squeeze into a suit tonight," Jimmy began with that trademark smirk plastered across his face. Dave Bautista, everybody. The guy who went from fake fighting in underwear to pretending to be a tough guy in movies. The audience let out an uncomfortable chuckle, clearly unsure whether this was typical late-night banter or something more pointed. Dave's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure, extending his hand for what should have been a standard greeting between host and guest. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Dave replied, his voice steady but with an edge that anyone paying attention would have caught immediately. Jimmy barely touched Dave's outstretched hand before pulling away with exaggerated concern. "Whoa there, big guy. Save some grip strength for the stunt doubles, am I right?" The host turned to his audience, playing for laughs that came more out of obligation than genuine amusement. As they both took their seats, Jimmy leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who believed his position as host gave him carte blanche to say whatever crossed his mind. "So, Dave, I have to ask, when you were rolling around in those tiny wrestling trunks, did you ever think you'd actually become a real actor? Or were you just hoping someone would mistake you for having actual talent?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dave's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arm of his chair, his years of professional training the only thing keeping him from responding with his fists instead of his words. "You know, Jimmy, I've always taken my craft seriously. Whether it was in the ring or on a movie set," Dave responded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had heard these dismissive comments far too many times. "I've worked with some incredible directors and actors who understand that athleticism and performance aren't mutually exclusive." Jimmy wasn't done, though. In fact, he was just getting started. "Oh, come on, Dave. Let's be honest here. You guys, in wrestling, you're basically just big, sweaty guys playing pretend, right? I mean, my writers could probably come up with better storylines than whatever soap opera drama you used to be part of." The audience was growing visibly uncomfortable now. What had started as typical late-night ribbing was clearly crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, especially with a guest who had graciously agreed to appear on the show. Dave's breathing had become more controlled, more deliberate, the way it used to get in the moments before his most intense matches. Wrestling requires incredible athletic ability, storytelling skills, and the ability to connect with audiences on an emotional level, Dave said, his voice still measured but with an underlying intensity that was impossible to miss. "Something I'm not sure you'd understand given your approach to entertainment." That last comment hit Jimmy like a slap across the face. His perpetual smirk faltered for just a moment before returning with twice the venom. "Oh, I see how it is. The musclehead wants to lecture me about entertainment. That's rich coming from someone whose idea of character development is flexing different muscle groups." The atmosphere in the studio had shifted dramatically. What should have been a light-hearted promotional interview was turning into something much darker, much more personal. Dave leaned forward slightly, his massive frame suddenly seeming even more imposing under the studio lights. "You know, Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my new film, to share something I'm proud of with your audience. But it seems like you're more interested in cheap shots and outdated stereotypes than having an actual conversation. Jimmy's response revealed just how little respect he had for his guest, or perhaps how little he understood about the man sitting across from him. "Hey, I'm just calling it like I see it, big guy. You wrestlers are all the same. Bunch of show-offs who think because you can throw a punch in choreographed fights, that makes you tough in the real world." The words had barely left Jimmy's mouth when something fundamental shifted in Dave Bautista's demeanor. Years of dealing with dismissive attitudes, condescending remarks, and people who refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of his journey suddenly crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every performer who had ever been dismissed, every athlete who had been mocked, every person who had been judged based on superficial assumptions. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy," Dave said, his voice dropping to a tone that made everyone in the studio suddenly pay very close attention. "You sit behind this desk every night, making jokes about people you don't know, dismissing achievements you don't understand, and hiding behind your audience's laughter like it somehow validates your ignorance." The studio fell silent. Even Jimmy seemed to realize that something had fundamentally changed in the dynamic between them. Dave continued, his words measured but carrying the weight of years of frustration. "You think because you have a platform, because you have writers feeding you lines, that gives you the right to tear down people who've actually put their bodies on the line for their art?" Dave's voice carried a quiet intensity that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. "You mock wrestling like it's beneath you, but at least we were honest about what we were doing. We didn't hide behind a desk making cheap jokes about people's livelihoods." Jimmy's face had gone pale, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he doubled down with the kind of desperate meanness that comes from someone who realizes they've pushed too far but can't find a way to retreat gracefully. "Oh, spare me the righteous indignation, Dave. You're sitting here acting like wrestling is some noble art form, when everybody knows it's just grown men in costumes rolling around for the entertainment of people who peaked in high school." The audience's discomfort was now palpable. Several people could be heard shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and the usual energy of a late-night studio audience had been replaced by intention so thick you could cut it with a knife. Dave's hands remained steady, but his eyes had taken on a look that anyone who had ever faced him in a wrestling ring would have recognized immediately. "You want to keep going down this road, Jimmy?" Dave asked, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. "Because I can sit here and talk about the years of training, the injuries, the dedication it takes to perform at that level. Or we can talk about how you've built a career making fun of people from the safety of your little bubble, never having to actually face consequences for the things you say." Jimmy's nervous laughter revealed just how out of his depth he had gotten. "Consequences? What are you going to do, Dave? Challenge me to a wrestling match? This is real life, not whatever fantasy world you used to live in." "Real life," Dave repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "You want to talk about real life? In real life, actions have consequences. In real life, when you disrespect someone to their face, especially someone who came here as your guest, you deal with the fallout. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Jimmy? You've spent so long hiding behind your writers and your producers that you've forgotten what it's like to actually face someone directly." The studio cameras continued rolling, capturing every word of an exchange that was rapidly moving beyond anything that could ever make it to air. Jimmy's usual confidence was cracking, replaced by the kind of desperate bravado that comes from someone who knows they're losing control of the situation. "Listen here, musclehead," Jimmy snapped, his voice rising as he abandoned any pretense of professional courtesy. "This is my show, my studio, and if you don't like how I run things, you can get your oversized butt out of that chair and find somewhere else to peddle whatever garbage movie you're trying to promote." Dave stood up slowly, his full 6'6" frame unfolding like a thundercloud rising over the horizon. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but unmistakably threatening. "Your show," he said quietly. Your studio. But you invited me here, Jimmy. You asked me to come on as your guest, and instead of showing even basic respect, you've spent the entire time trying to humiliate me for your audience's entertainment. Jimmy remained seated, but his body language screamed discomfort as Dave's shadow fell across his desk. Sit down, Dave. You're making everyone uncomfortable. I'm making everyone uncomfortable. Dave's voice carried a note of genuine incredulity. Jimmy, you've been insulting me, my profession, and my colleagues for the past 10 minutes. You've dismissed everything I've worked for as fake, meaningless, and beneath your consideration. And now you're worried about people being uncomfortable? The host's desperation was becoming more obvious by the second. Look, it's just comedy, okay? It's what we do here. We make jokes, we have fun, nobody takes it seriously. Nobody takes it seriously, Dave repeated, his voice dropping even lower. Tell that to the kids who look up to wrestlers as heroes. Tell that to the performers who've dedicated their lives to entertaining people. Tell that to anyone who's ever been dismissed and mocked for pursuing something they're passionate about. Jimmy's attempt at regaining control of the situation was pathetic in its transparency. Okay, let's just calm down here. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you sit back down and we can talk about your movie like we originally planned? Dave didn't move. Now you want to talk about my movie? After spending the entire interview making it clear that you think I'm nothing more than a joke? After insulting not just me, but everyone who's ever stepped into a wrestling ring? You think you can just flip a switch and pretend like the last 15 minutes didn't happen? The silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy's usual quick wit had completely abandoned him, leaving him scrambling for something, anything, that might help him regain the upper hand. What came out of his mouth next would prove to be the final straw. You know what, Dave? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you're too sensitive, too thin-skinned to handle a little ribbing. Maybe that's why you had to leave wrestling, because you couldn't handle the pressure of being a real performer. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Dave's expression didn't change, but something fundamental shifted in his posture, in his breathing, in the very atmosphere around him. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet that the studio microphones had to strain to pick it up. Too sensitive, he said slowly. Too thin-skinned. Jimmy, I've been thrown through tables, slammed onto concrete floors, and taken punishment that would put most people in the hospital. I've performed with broken ribs, torn muscles, and injuries that should have kept me on the sidelines for months. But you think I'm too sensitive because I won't sit here and smile while you mock everything I've worked for. Jimmy's face had gone from pale to red, his anger finally overriding his fear. Yeah, well, maybe if you hadn't been playing dress-up for most of your career, you'd understand how real entertainment works. That was it. The moment when Dave Bautista's legendary patience finally reached its absolute limit. Dave's response came with the kind of controlled fury that made everyone in the studio understand why he had been one of the most feared competitors in professional wrestling. Playing dress-up, he repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made several audience members visibly flinch. Jimmy, let me explain something to you about playing dress-up. Every night, you put on your little suit, you sit behind your little desk, and you pretend to be entertaining. You pretend to be funny. You pretend to be relevant. But at least when I was in that ring, I wasn't pretending to respect the people who made my career possible. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. For the first time in years of hosting, he was completely speechless, faced with someone who refused to play along with his usual dynamic of mock and dismiss. You want to talk about real entertainment? Dave continued, his voice rising slightly as years of suppressed frustration finally found their outlet. Real entertainment is putting your body on the line every single night. Real entertainment is connecting with thousands of people who believe in what you're doing. Real entertainment is earning respect through dedication and hard work, not tearing other people down to make yourself feel superior. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing something that had never happened in the history of a late-night television. A guest was not just pushing back against a host's provocations, he was systematically dismantling everything the host represented. Jimmy finally found his voice, but it came out as a weak, desperate attempt to reassert his authority. "You need to sit down right now, Dave, or I'm going to have security remove you from my studio." Dave's laugh was humorless, almost pitying. "Your security? Jimmy, do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound right now? You invited me here, you spent the entire interview insulting me and everything I stand for, and now you're threatening to have me removed because I won't sit quietly and take your abuse? It's not abuse, it's comedy," Jimmy shot back, his voice cracking slightly. "You're supposed to be able to take a joke." "A joke?" Dave's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio suddenly very aware of just how big and physically imposing he really was. "Jimmy, jokes are supposed to be funny. What you've been doing is systematic humiliation. You've been trying to make me look stupid, trying to diminish my accomplishments, trying to make your audience laugh at my expense. That's not comedy, that's bullying." The word bullying seemed to hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His face went through several different shades of red as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I am not a bully. I'm a comedian. I make jokes. That's what I do." "No, Jimmy. What you do is pick on people who can't fight back. You make fun of celebrities who need your show more than you need them. You mock people who are too polite or too professional to call you out on your behavior. But you made one mistake tonight. You picked on someone who spent his entire career learning how to handle bullies." The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Several audience members were looking around nervously, as if expecting something to happen that would require them to leave quickly. The camera operators continued filming, but their body language suggested they were ready to move at a moment's notice. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Okay, that's enough. Dave, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown here. I think it's best if you just leave now before this gets any more embarrassing for you." Dave's smile was cold and calculating. "Embarrassing for me? Jimmy, the only person who should be embarrassed here is you. You've just spent the last 20 minutes showing your audience, your staff, and everyone watching at home exactly what kind of person you really are. You've proven that when faced with someone who won't play your game, you resort to insults, threats, and attempts to humiliate them into submission." "Security!" Jimmy called out, his voice now openly panicked. "I need security in here right now." Two security guards entered the studio, but their hesitation was obvious. They had clearly been watching the exchange and understood that Dave had done nothing wrong other than refuse to be insulted quietly. Dave looked at them with something approaching sympathy. "Gentlemen, I understand you're just doing your job," he said calmly, "but I want everyone here to understand what's happening. I came here as a guest. I was treated with disrespect and contempt, and now I'm being removed because I had the audacity to defend myself." One of the security guards stepped forward awkwardly. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Dave nodded slowly, his dignity intact despite the situation. "Of course you are, because this is Jimmy's show, Jimmy's studio, and Jimmy's rules. And Jimmy's rules apparently include the right to humiliate guests without consequence." As Dave began to walk toward the exit, he turned back to address Jimmy one final time. "You know what the saddest part about all of this is, Jimmy? You had a chance tonight to have a real conversation with someone who's lived an extraordinary life, someone who's overcome incredible obstacles to achieve success in multiple fields. Instead, you chose to be small, petty, and cruel. You chose to tear someone down rather than build them up, and that says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are." Jimmy's final response was perhaps the most pathetic moment of the entire exchange. "Yeah, well, Don't let the door hit you on the way out, musclehead. Dave paused at the exit, shaking his head sadly. And there it is, folks, the true measure of a man revealed in his final words. Jimmy, when you're lying in bed tonight, ask yourself this. Did what happened here tonight make you proud? Did insulting a guest, dismissing their achievements, and having them removed from your studio make you feel like a better person? Because I can tell you right now, it didn't make. You look like one. With that, Dave Bautista walked out of the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio, leaving behind a host who had been thoroughly exposed, an audience that had witnessed something unprecedented, and a situation that would be talked about for years to come. The cameras continued rolling as Jimmy sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The confrontation was over, but the impact of what had just happened would reverberate far beyond that. Studio. Dave Bautista had shown the world what happens when someone refuses to be diminished, when respect is demanded rather than requested, and when dignity matters more than maintaining the status quo. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen a guest stand up to a host like this before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories that expose the real side of Hollywood and late-night television. The entertainment industry is full of moments like this that never make it to air, but we're here to bring you the truth behind the cameras.